really happy to see so many smiling faces here. And thank you especially to TDC for inviting me, which is obviously an honor for me, because back in Denmark, where I come from, TDC is famous, at least in our type environment. So when I get back, I can brag, which is great. So before I go on, might sit down to get close to the mic. It's really sensitive. I think before I go on with the presentation, I'm gonna tell a little bit about myself. And I'm doing that because I think when I hear presentations on work in general, I think it's really nice to know just a little bit about the person presenting his or her work. So, as you can probably hear on my strong accent, I'm not American, I'm Danish. And I am here in New York, and I've been living here for 5 months now. And I'm actually here because my girlfriend, she's a project intern. So I just came along. So you can say right now I'm a homemaker, and I'm also a full-time type designer. And we have been living in the Lower East Side, which is a really, really nice place. But we live very close to the Williamsburg Bridge, which is quite noisy. So one thing I miss is silence. You can say one thing I really quickly discovered when I arrived is that the type community in New York is really strong compared to in Denmark. I've attended some of TDC's events. I remember one at Parsons, I think it was. And I don't hope I over-exaggerate, but I think that was like 100 people. That's just amazing. It's really inspiring for a Dane like me to see so many people interested in type design. That's great. I can say I am educated from the Danish Design School in Copenhagen. I have a BA and undergraduate. And actually, I've never been formally trained in type design. I never attended Reading or Den Haag or those kind of very great places. But I have always had an interest in typefaces, obviously. And one thing that has followed me, and a guy that I studied with, name is Rasmus. He's the guy you see here. He has been my, how can you say, long-time collaborator and friend and type partner. A great thing about Rasmus, besides from being a very kind guy, is he is, I guess, like 10 or 20% cleverer than me. So I'm the lucky one in our relationship. I kind of miss him. Rasmus and I have been working as freelancers, and we actually had our own small type foundry 2 or 3 years ago called ABC. We did a lot of freelancing for a very great place in Copenhagen, a design agency called Kontrapunkt. Kontrapunkt is, how can you say, it's a branding studio, like kind of like the studios you know from New York, like Pentagram or Wolf Ollens. So we make a lot of, how can you say, strategic-based design, and a lot of graphic design, obviously, as well. I think one thing that is particularly interesting, at least from my point of view, about Kontrapunkt is that type design has always been a signature field within the company. And it is run primarily by Bo. I need to get very close to the mic. Who's the founder of Kontrapunkt. And then it's Rasmus and Clara and me. Normally, when I get excited about letters, I move closer to the screen, but that's not really possible today. So I will sit tight here. You can say one thing that has been also special about the way we work with type design in Kontrapunkt is that we only do bespoke typefaces. I've only made 1 retail typeface in my life, actually. Or 3, but only one of them have been sold. I know 2 of them never sold anything. So I would just say 1. I guess to understand the special Danish tradition that I have been brought up with in terms of type design, we need to understand a bit of history. Because I would say one thing that is, how can you say, special when working with bespoke brand typefaces is that we kind of can free ourselves from the, how can you say, conventional type design, like is it a Didone or serif or sans serif, etc. Because all our projects have to take starting point in something that is unique for the client. And to understand why we work like that, which some people could say is a bastard approach to designing typefaces, I think if one gets a bit of history, which was also good for me, it's better. They will have a better understanding on why we work the way we do. And you can say, like, in most regions of Europe, they have a really strong type tradition with Baskerville and everything, and it's really admiring. But I would say in Denmark, type tradition looks more like this. And it's a weird blend of many different things. But I think one thing that goes again and again when seeing Danish design tradition, and especially Danish type design tradition, is that all of those old type designers were architects. And I think that's a reason for why they made so many, how can you say, very expressive typefaces, more sculptural typefaces, at least in my opinion. And I guess it has something to do with architects. They have seen the letters as individual objects or sculptures that you can give form to more than a system, which you would probably say was the conventional way of designing a typeface. And you could say one of the very famous, you can almost say the first Danish designer, called Knud V. Engelhardt. You can pronounce it like Angel Heart, I guess. He's an architect, and he made trams and advertising columns and wayfinding. But I think a very interesting thing about that is actually what he's most famous for is his type designs. And how an architect ended up designing typefaces, I really don't know. Maybe it has to do with architects in general. They think they can design everything. And maybe it's a bit arrogant of them, but I admire it to some extent. Because if they can build a house, they can also design a typeface, of course. Actually, you can boil it down to this piece of work by Engelhardt. This typeface has been made in, I don't know, so many versions during the years in Danish design. And at the design school, I made a version myself too. And it's the one you can see on this wayfinding. It's a part of from the suburb of north of Copenhagen. And also, I think you can say there has always been like a master-apprentice relationship between these architects. So one has been the professional, and he has then taught the next guy, and on and on and on. And this is Gunnar Billman. He was an apprentice of Engelhardt, and you can see he designs kind of the same typefaces, but also making a lot of industrial design as well. So we have never had this tradition of, letterpress and legible typefaces. We have just made typefaces because that look like fun. And I think it's very easy to see there is this line going all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century and all the way up. And I think a very interesting thing and the reason why I find it very interesting as well is because, at least in my opinion, I hope he agrees, because he's my boss. Bo Lindemann, he's the last in that row, you can say. And Bo is the founder of Kontrapunkt. And when we look at Bo's old work, you can see there are many references back to the old Engelhardt typefaces. This is one he made for the Danish railways. And you can see, I think they have like a sculptural quality. Just the letter shapes themselves, they have a lot of personality. You can write with them, but it's almost like they also have a tone, just the individual letters. And every time I'm traveling and get back to Copenhagen, I feel safe because I'm always met by this typeface. It's on every train station, and in my opinion, it's like a Danish design classic somehow. And it was designed, I'm not sure, I think it was in the middle of the 90s, and it's still in use. And to me, that's kind of a proof that often type design can outlive many other graphic design disciplines, like color or photography style and everything, which often are changed every now and then because a new trend comes in. And often I see the typefaces, they live for much longer time. It's the same with the typeface Bo he designed for the Danish pharmacies. It has a lot of character, but if you are a Dane, you're somehow familiar with this because it's at every pharmacy in the country. Oh, okay, that was the history part. which I feel obliged to tell because it's really important for how I work in Kontrapunkt now together with my colleagues. And I also think it's very important to understand why we work the way we do today, because now in Kontrapunkt we make a lot of bespoke typefaces, which I'm really happy about because then I can make a living from it, which I find a privilege. And I think this particular sculptural approach to designing typefaces, seeing the letters as sculptures, almost like writing with a logo, is relevant today because when I look around, I see, you probably have seen it if you go to Twitter or Instagram or stuff like this, that many big brands, they look more and more alike. And in my opinion, and this is very subjective, it's just I find it a bit uncanny because I want to see like a diverse visual language around the world. And what I see is a tendency that everything becomes, how can you say, more and more the same. And of course you can say, yeah, it's just the logo and the logo is dead and whatever. But when you go like one step deeper and looking at the user interfaces, they look very much, at least in my opinion, the same as well. It's always a white background and a fancy picture and a version of Helvetica to some extent. And Helvetica is beautiful and all those typefaces are beautiful, but I just think they have a very narrow expression to some extent, especially when they are layouted the way you can see they are layouted here. Oh, that was great. Also, I think it's an important point because if you are a type designer and you want to make your own version of circular or graphic or one of those very beautiful and well-crafted typefaces, I think from a business point of view, business is something I'm also interested in because if you mix business and type, then you can make a living from it. So that's something we do in Kontrapunkt as well. And when you see all the new, how can you say, ways to obtain typefaces, for example, the type kit, it's so cheap for the client. So, I mean, you have a bad argument if you want a client to pay a lot of money for a bespoke typeface that looks quite similar to something you can obtain quite cheap via Adobe's type kit, for example. And I also see a challenge with the whole Google suite and Google fonts as well, because in our world, there is Glyphs app and there's InDesign and that's it. But around the world, people are using many other platforms as well. Platforms that, for example, at Google Suite, you cannot use third-party fonts. You cannot implement your own typeface. You can only use Google fonts. And then you can say an argument, just some years ago, that's at least an argument I used a lot, is the Google fonts are bad quality. But in fact, that's not the case anymore. Many Google fonts are of a really high quality. So if you want to kind of stand out in the market, I guess you have to make something that can be very unique for the client. So if, let's say, taking back the diversity glasses and asking, that's something we do a lot, Rasmus and Bo and Clara and I, we talk to each other about how can we approach this or how can we add personality to the typefaces. And you could say, I'm not a philosopher, I would say, or an intellectual for that matter. I'm a craftsman. So the way we have done this is very practical, you can say. We have actually made some different maps. So one idea could be, let's for example say Carlsberg, we could design a typeface that is rooted in the logo, meaning the logo as a typeface. Sometimes we design typefaces for existing CVIs. Nissan, for example, where the typeface we design has to work in an already existing brand identity. It can be like a symbolic storytelling, taking starting point in sound, if it's for a sound company. So try to see how can we get a look and feel of sound within the concrete letter shapes. It can be a historical reference. For example, if it's a company that has a tradition within Danish design, for example, it could be a Danish design looking typeface. Or it could be inspiration from the nature, for example. So one thing I want to show, because this is like a Kontrapunkt master exercise, is taking a logo and unfold it into a working typeface. This is something we have done for Carlsberg, and we just recently did it for the Vivo, and Vivo is like an Asian smartphone brand that sooner or later they will also take over Europe and the States, I guess. And we have done it for Denso as well, which is a Japanese advanced automotive engineering company. And the one I want to show today is one we made for the A6 Tiger brand. We did it together with Bruce Mao Design in Toronto. And Bruce Mao is a very great design company. I think they were really great to collaborate together with. The thing with, I think this is 4 years ago. It was something we did in Kontrapunkt just before we started working there full time. It's, you can say the challenge for the A6 Tiger was they want to revitalize a brand because for the consumers, it was pretty hard to tell the difference between the performance brand, you know, the professional running shoes, and then the lifestyle swagger shoes. So if you take one thing that is very specific to A6 Tiger, it's the, how can you say, iconic word mark. And most people know this word mark already. So the idea we came up with was to actually taking the word mark, cutting it up, and develop a typeface from that. And you can say it's almost like a first-year design school exercise, like having circles and squares and composing a typeface from that. Of course, when you work with type design, you have to make a lot of optical adjustments and everything. But using this very, how can you say, almost naive way of designing, you can come up with a typeface that actually mimics the logo in every letter shape. And a really great thing about this, I think, is that only A6 Tiger can use this font, because it's so much A6 Tiger that no one else can use it unless they want to make marketing for A6. And I think one thing I really like about it too is that the letter shapes, they are so graphic, so you can use them in a really big point size, almost like a fifth element. As you can see, it has been staged together with the shoes. I would say that here you can see it's A6 Tiger even without having the logo. And I think that can be pretty strong. And you can use it in small marketing pieces, but you can also use it on big billboards as well. And I have seen it everywhere, both in, I think this was in Shibuya in Tokyo, and this is from Copenhagen in Denmark. And I don't know if it's the A6 Tiger internal design team or Bruce Mao who makes these layouts, but I think they're really beautiful. And I think another great thing is they can use it on low facades, and they can use it when opening new stores and everything. And you can see that it can be staged together with the shoes as well. And I mean, for me, it's just great to see it put in use like this, because often it comes very much down to how the graphic designers stage the fonts we design. The graphic designers are just as important as the type designers when it comes to putting a typeface alive. And I think one thing I sometimes do to measure if our project was a success is to go on Instagram and see if people stage themselves with the brand. And if they do so, it's a success. And that's why I brought this one, because here people do it, and it's not every time that happens. And I think this is something, I guess it was Bo who told me once, that you forget what you read, but you remember what you see. And I think that's really strong, because at least that's how it works for me. I always forget notes, but I can remember stuff when I see pictures. And I think it's the same you can do with a typeface like this, that you instantly recognize it as A6 Tiger if you have been exposed to it just a couple of times. Another thing we often do in the Type Lab in Kontrapunkt is trying to look at what we can do in the future with type design. And because type design is so much about craftsmanship, and it's so much about designing a tool that works, but as I see it, there's a lot of other, how can you say, opportunities within type design. It can be, maybe it can support a change, a strategic change, but also a change in general. Or maybe it could be collaborative. You know, often type design is very much you and a pen and a laptop for a year, and then it's done, which is satisfying, but it's also a bit lonely, in my opinion. And we have also been talking about what if a typeface is never finished and you can go on designing on the same typeface like a beta that is in constant development. And that's what I want to show an example of how we have done that in this next example. One moment. You can all hear me, right? Because it's hard for me. Okay, that's great. This is a project we made with Woodwood in Copenhagen, and Woodwood is a fashion brand, and they make popular clothing in Copenhagen. Probably you don't know it over here, but in Denmark they are pretty popular at least. And they work within fashion and clothing retail, meaning that they make new clothes all the time. So for us it was an obvious partner to team up with, because maybe we could apply that to the type design as well, constantly developing it and seeing it as a, how can you say, ongoing collaboration where the typeface is never finished, just like it is with Woodwood and the way they work with fashion. So what we first came up with was this, which I agree looks a bit subtle, almost generic. You can say this is, I guess you can call it our version of accidents grotesque somehow. I mean, this was to open a door into Woodwood, saying that we don't want to take you as a hostage in our mission to fight typographic monoculture. We can just make a typeface you can use on whatever platform. You can have it for free. But I think the great thing about that is when having a typeface that looks so subtle that no one notices it as a Woodwood typeface, it allows us to start designing a lot of stylistic alternates that can be constantly updated. And when we want to make very expressive stylistic sets and alternates, to really let them thrive, they do that better if they are paired with a more subtle typeface. And I think a way we could use it was in this example, and I will show more lively pictures in a moment. Woodwood was about to open a store in the Copenhagen airport, and the store is like a concept store where everything is inspired by bag tags and, you know, from the airport. So we designed together with Woodwood a stylistic set where all the letters were inspired by these bag tags and had this, how can you say, pixelated effect. And they can now use it in the store as a, how can you say, a branding tool, which is great because that's a way for us to also show that, say, you can do bespoke brand typefaces in so many different ways. And I think a great thing about it is they can apply it on all the products as well. And I think it's almost, I think it's a bit flattering, but I also think it's a bit scary that now it's just like a clear signature for Woodwood. Another great thing is that, for example, if they are having a sale or what they call a Japanese takeover, we can make some certain Japanese glyphs and use them together with the typeface. And it's like a never-ending collaboration. Next time they have an opening of a store or something like that, we can keep on developing the typeface. Also because, at least from my opinion, an alternate like this, it's very trendy, meaning in my eyes it looks cool now, but in 1 year it's outdated. So we can just throw it out and make some new ones after that. And I just hope they want to continue the collaboration, because if not, I mean, it's a fail, but I see it growing more and more within the company. Another thing that Kontrapunkt has done a lot also before I started is taking inspiration from the nature. And I think when working with design in general, taking inspiration from the nature is like the biggest cliche ever. But Kontrapunkt has just been really, really, really good at that, I think, because clichés are great if you are a good craftsman, because then you can make it look very beautiful and aesthetic and still have a strong story. We have done that with the Noma typeface, for example. And the Noma typeface was done before I started, unfortunately, because it's very popular. But I want to show an example of how we have used the nature as inspiration for a typeface we did for a resort in Japan on an island called Miyakojima. It's in Japan. And it's like a, how can you say, an exclusive resort where people can come and chill out and have a good time and come back as better people, I think they would say about themselves. And they are placed on a beach. It's a very beautiful place. I haven't been there, but I've seen the pictures. I hope to go there someday. We're often in Japan due to work, so I hope I will have a chance at some point. And it's really great architecture as well, I think. It's very minimal. It's almost a bit like seeing Danish architecture. And I often see a link between Japanese architecture and design and Danish design. So one take was to see, okay, if we type design meets nature, and like the idea with the Rescape resort, that's what the client said, and that's what they told us, is they wanted people to come here and feel the richness of time flowing. So if we translate that into a typeface, you can get a typeface that slowly dissolves, you know, like driftwood or stones in the sand on the beach. Something that has a really long story but still looks beautiful. We want to translate that into a font. So if you take a conventional typeface and applies that, I think you get something that has a certain, can you say, tone to it. And one thing is to apply it on the letter. We also have to see how it works when start typing words. And this is done using variable fonts. And I think a very important thing when using variable fonts, at least when you are working the way we are, where we want to tell stories with our letters, the whole journey, if you can call it that, it has to look beautiful, meaning that it has to look nice in every instance. This could be many different weights if we break it into different instances. And I think when you analyze it, you can see, at least I think so, it looks like an A that lies in the water for many years and it slowly dissolves. And when doing that, we can unfold it into a typeface. And the great thing, and we do that again and again, and I find that fascinating every time, if you have a font that has a personality, you almost have a brand, in my opinion. So with this font, we can build a logo and stage it with pictures, and we're already pretty far, and we can start typing with it. You can say a font like this is not really legible, so we have paired it with a more legible typeface. Another great thing where I really can see that typefaces carry a lot of DNA and personality is that you can fold out and design pictograms and stuff like that based on the typeface. So it's how can you say, repeated again and again. And you can make, I don't know, shampoo, hair. And they can use it of course, in the hotel and everything from the logo to like do not disturb tags and stuff like that. And use it as wayfinding as well. Another way of working is something we do a lot and which I find a very great way to work with type design is to, how can you say, tell what the typeface does in a very direct way. And this is why I want to show you this project. And this project is for a Chinese company called Gore-Tex, and you probably don't know it because I didn't know it before we started this collaboration as well. And Gore-Tex, they make, as you can guess, they make audio variables and audio components for Samsung and Apple and companies like them. So it's primary business to business. But the thing is, Gore-Tex is opening a quite big R&D hub in Qingdao, which is in China. And we were commissioned to design wayfinding together with Nippon Design Center, which is a collaborator we have in Tokyo, to design wayfinding for this R&D hub. And we can say the thing is that Gore-Tex works with audio. You can see this is the hub. It's still work in progress. They haven't done the architecture yet. So I'm looking really much forward to see it in use. And you can see they make stuff like this, very technical stuff, and watches and stuff you put into a loudspeaker, and also in your AirPods as well. And I've always been fascinated with sound, and I think sound has such a, how can you say, it's so visual as well. And I mean, this is another cliche you can say, but if you take audio and pair it with letters, they could look like something like that over on your right. So if we want to develop a wayfinding typeface for Gore-Tex that communicates they work with audio, I think this could be a pretty strong way of doing that. When we have an idea like this and we want to present it to a client, that can be quite complicated because first of all we need to convince them and we need to show them something that they maybe have not seen before and therefore they find it scary. So something we have started doing is making some concept videos that easily explains the concept. And I have this slide before because I often forget that the video starts. And there's sound on this one. So this is to explain the concept. Also because when we sit in Copenhagen and work with a client in China, it's pretty hard for us to, how can you say, communicate the concept like face to face. We have to make videos and slides that explains everything. And we've just realized that videos are much better for doing that.
Hello.
So you can see we really want to flex the muscle when we present these concepts, and it's really time consuming and expensive as well. But it's the only way sometimes for us to get the idea through. And afterwards the client asked, wow, can you make a typeface that moves? And the answer was no. Because mostly typefaces are static. So what we could do would be to make stylistic sets, again, one with like a, what is it called, like a sine wave, both with the hard sine waves and the more soft curves, so they can pick different, how can you say, stylistic alternates. But that, in my opinion, is just so unsatisfying in a way. And what we intentionally wanted to do was almost to stick a microphone into the letter and make the letter vibrate and animate and, how can you say, move. And also because the whole idea is that we wanted a typeface that could react to sound, actually. And you can say, fortunately for us, when we were doing this project, the whole variable font thing was introduced. And when a new technology is introduced within type design, I mean, everyone is talking about it. And I mean, I see myself as a storyteller and a graphic designer, basically. And every time a new technology is introduced, I think often it tends to be like just ordering more fries when you're at McDonald's. It's just more of the same, more weights, you know, like, yeah, with variable fonts now you can have 1 million weights, but who wants 1 million weights? I mean, or 16 weights just. For me, it's too much. I just want like 1 or 2 or 3 weights, and then I can play around with that. And I think, but I really, actually, I'm proving myself wrong, I guess, because variable fonts are pretty amazing, because you can do so much more than just make, how can you say, variable fonts and can go from light to black. You can use variable fonts as a component to tell stories with the letters. And actually, when using variable font technology, we could start make letters that actually move. And the great thing with a variable font is it can react to anything. Basically, it can react to sound, or it could also react to light or pollution or whatever. It's totally up to the designer. If you have a variable font, you can just write in the CSS code on the website it should react to sound, for example. So actually that opened up the possibility for us to make a variable font that is not static, but a dynamic typeface that actually could do that. And basically, this is a bit nerdy, but I guess it's okay, especially at this place. When you see you have like traditional light and bold, but with variable fonts introduces like a new axis where you can do whatever you like. And for this particular case, we could just call it frequency, meaning that you can both slide between light and bold, but you can also have a typeface that slides from, as you can see in the example, from static, silent, to vibrating when sound appears. And this has been quite a breakthrough for us, because this is a project that other type designers I have experienced also find interesting, which can sometimes be tough when you work within branding, like I do, and also work with type, because that's a weird mix sometimes. I think also a great thing is that it still has to work like static, like a static font, and I think this still has some aesthetics to it. I mean, not aesthetics like pretty, but aesthetics in the terms of, how can you say, evoking senses in a way. Something we often do afterwards is we have to, when a project is done, actually this project isn't done because it has to be implemented within the building, which I'm looking forward to see how we do, because it might be expensive, but we'll see how that works out. And every time when we finish a project, or most often, we want to kind of document it, making a video, so we have something both for our own sake, so we can remember the project, but also something we can do to show our work like externally and promote it as well. And we have made this small video together with a Danish composer called Thomas Knack, I'm a big fan of him. I think when preparing a presentation like this, it forces one to kind of analyze your own work, which is intimidating, because when you have done something, you just want to move on to the next thing. That's at least how I feel. But I think I can see that without knowing it, we're still building on this Danish tradition. This example, Hellesens, is a Gunnar Billman. It's 100 years old type design he made, and I think I can see not only it has some of the same shapes, but it has the same, how can you say, conceptual approach, where you add just a lot of personality to the individual letter shapes. Another thing we do, except for these, how can you say, more experimental projects, are, and that's also, you can say, the core of our business, is we make brand typefaces for big companies around the world, which is something I find very interesting as well, because there you can really see the typeface as a tool that is spread out and that many people can put in use in every day. One we just finalized is for Maersk, and some of you might know Maersk. It's a shipping and logistics company. It's a multi-conglomerate, you can say, have existed for many, many years. And what we have done for them is a typeface, and that's what I want to show you now. And if you don't look at strategy or anything, or something like Maersk want to convey a more conversational tone, or Maersk want to be a brand alive for many years from now. If you take all that stuff apart, all the strategic learnings, and just look at what is very iconic to Maersk, I think it's the star that is on all the ships and everything. So what we have done is basically building a typeface based on this Maersk star. And you could say that's a very, you could say, a classic Kontrapunkt exercise as well to do this. And I think when we have to tell people why does a typeface look the way it does, it's much easier to have this video than start telling about strategic research and everything like that. And of course, when making a project like this, there goes a lot of research into legibility. For this project, we made both a headline typeface, that one that is suitable for text as well, and that they can use in apps and everything. And I think a great thing is that you can also use it like graphic elements and make posters from it as well. Actually, Maersk, they have a merchandise shop where people buy Maersk merchandise. That's pretty incredible, I think. And I think a great thing here is that I can see the work we do now put in this Danish tradition, that it has many of the same features in a way. I would really like to see my own work and the work we do at Kontrapunkt as original, because we strive to make original type design. But I'm also happy to see that it is put into, how can you say, a historic context. And you can see this is a typeface for the Danish railways that Bo designed 25 years ago. And it has kind of some of the same, can you say, personality. And we did it even without really knowing that, which is great, but also scary. And you can see when I talk about making a headline typeface and a text typeface, it's very practical. It just means in a headline typeface you can have a recognizable G like this, but that might be hard to read in a longer text, so we make a more, for example, conventional G in the text weights, but it still have to look convey the same tone, so you can use the headline and the text typeface together. Sometimes when doing projects like this, I can get the feeling that, you know, on a gray day, like, what does it matter? Because who cares actually? Because we make this typeface and then it's done and they start using it and whatever. But I think a great way to kind of overcome that depressive, can you say, mindset is to see it as a part of a bigger, can you say, movement that Maersk will have a long life. They had a long life before us and after, and the typeface is just a part of that, how can you say, very long story. And if we can play a part in that as well, I think it's just really, really great. One of the ideas was that, I mean, this is what Maersk is known for. It's like a shipping multi-conglomerate. And they have big ships, and they almost look a bit, you know, it's very industrial. They almost look a bit scary. They are so big. And the typeface they had put in use was a typeface that almost looks like the containers and the ships. It's very boxy. And what Maersk wants to do is to convey a more, how can you say, conversational tone, going from being very focused on shipping and logistics to be more user-focused in a way. And a typeface like this, I mean, it has a lot of brand character. It's really great typeface, but it's also very authoritative, at least in my opinion. So you can see basically if you strip off everything and see the old typeface compared with the new one, a success criteria is to have a, can you say, yeah, conversational tone, more open letter forms, easier to read, but still having a headline weight that has some signature letters like the G, or that we cut off the horizontal stem in the T, so it's something people can recognize. And the great thing about that, I think, is they can use it on everything from ships and containers down to the apps on the iPhone or smartphones. So it's like a typeface can be like a safe partner that is present on every platform. Kontrapunkt has become, we have a lot of business in Japan, and that has been going on for many years, also before I started in Kontrapunkt. And I've always asked myself, why is Kontrapunkt so popular in Japan? Because, for example, no one here knows Kontrapunkt in New York, which I have experienced on my own body. And when I go out, no one knows who we are, which is not the way it is in Denmark, because Denmark is a very small country. So if you are a big branding agency in Denmark, everyone knows who you are. I think when I look, and this is also something that some of my colleagues have showed me, there is a kind of link between Japan and Denmark when talking about design, in my opinion. There is this attention to detail and sustainability and craftsmanship. You can see this is some Japanese furniture from the Kisaragi collection, and these are some Danish design classics, you can say. And they share like the same visual language to some extent. And I guess that is why, I mean, that there is a special link between Denmark and Japan somehow when it comes to design. And the project I want to show you is, I think it fits that story very well, because it's a joint collaboration between a Danish architecture firm called Norm and a Japanese furniture manufacturer called Kaimoko, which have kind of joined forces to make a new, you can say, joint venture where they produce furniture together. So I think it's really great to have a Danish architecture firm together with a Japanese to see, how can you say, what they can come up with together. And you can see some of the furniture they have made. I cannot even tell if this is Danish or Japanese. It just looks like something my mom and dad could buy that, you know, that is in almost every Danish home. This is something from the new project they made. It's called Karimoko Case Study. So you can see it carries a certain serene beauty, I would call it, where it's very minimal but still there's a very close attention to detail. And we, together with Norm and Karimoko, have developed, you can say, the visual identity for this joint venture. And the whole idea with this new visual identity that it has to convey the tone, you know, of sustainability, and something very serene and almost quiet, but still very well crafted. As you can see in these pictures, these are from some of the mood boards, and actually some of them are also pictures from the Karimoko factory as well. So as you can see, it's very much attention to detail. So I think if you want to translate this language into letter shapes, it's very much hands-on. It's taking some of the, how can you say, the work of the hand and see how it goes if you try to implement that in the individual letter shapes. Of course, it also has to do with how you lay out it. And I know that I often say that we do not share, how can you say, the type tradition that is present in Europe. But of course, we are very, how can you say, inspired by that as well. And the typeface we made for the Karimoko case study is actually based on, you know, the old Futura typeface as well. But you can see it adds and it carries some small features here and there that gives the typeface, how can you say, this serene beauty to some extent. It looks very minimalistic, but it has small features here and there. And the great thing with this, it's actually a bit similar to the Rescape example I showed. When designing this typeface, we can develop word marks pretty easily, and we can start typing with it and see how it looks and if it conveys the tone and look and feel of the Karimoko case study. So this might not be such an expressive typeface, but it's more like it has to whisper in a cool way. And of course, when looking at it, the furniture always have to be the hero. So the typeface has to kind of play a second role every time it's presented together with the furniture. So the typeface just has to support the furniture and not steal too much attention. These are some pictures from the launch of the joint venture, the Karimoko case study in Copenhagen from some months ago. I think it's nice to see typefaces play like a second role and not like, for example, with the A6 Tiger example, it's just a big font just splashed out. This is more like something that has to work together with furniture and also together with a secondary typeface. So this is what we primarily do. This is my day-to-day job, which I really, really love. Another thing that I really find interesting about type is how to make it interesting for non-designers. Because people who are not graphic designers or type designers, they don't care about fonts because they don't know that they exist. So one thing we're really working a lot with is to try to make it relevant for the mainstream. And right now we are working on an exhibition for the Ginza Graphic Gallery, which is in Tokyo. And it's opening in September during the A-Type High as well. So this is something we're working on right now, how to stage typefaces in a way that where I could invite my mom and dad and they would find it interesting as well. So it could be, for example, having a microphone where people can talk. You can see with the Gore-Tex example, and the typeface starts vibrating. I'm really interested to see how this is going to work out and if it works, because we want to show that typefaces can be fun, but we also want to show this whole the engineering that goes into type design, because I think that there are two parallel tracks that I find interesting. It is the whole sculpturing part, that typefaces can be really beautiful, but there's also the engineering part that goes into designing a typeface. I mean, there are hours of finalizing and coding and everything, which we also want to show people that are not, how can you say, familiar with type design. And this is from the project we did with Vivo, and try to, how can we make this interesting in a context that is so different from where we are used to see typefaces in use. So, and I think this has really made me conscious about what I do, because I think it's so important to, how can you say, communicate the work that you do and try to elaborate on why does it look the way it does and why is it important. And that's also what I try to do tonight. So yeah, thank you very much. If any of you have any questions, you are very welcome. And if you don't dare, that's okay as well. Or if you disagree with this approach, that's something I often experience, so that is also okay. Yeah?
If you had to register the four-letter code for the sound axis, would you use the Danish word for sound, or would it just be like SND? Like, there's a bunch of registered axes for like variable fonts.
Yeah.
Right, like weight and stuff like that. If you had to like register the sound axes, would you?
Right now we just called it CSTM for custom. So that's how you code it with CSS, and it's just custom. You can call it whatever. Yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this was super inspiring. There's a group here from the SVA residency in typography, so we're all type students in this section. And I'm curious if you have any advice for a young typographer who might want to pursue this kind of work.
Yeah. Well, if you find it interesting and working with type, that's a really good start. I think the craft behind designing typefaces is the most important, because I have myself had a tendency to neglect the whole craftsmanship of designing letter shapes and knowing about history, which is fundamental in type design. So I think that respecting that, but if you can also add, I don't know, like a personal trait on that to some extent, because the type community and people that design typefaces, it has exploded, I think. So if you want to stand out, I think it's important to have like a certain approach. I mean, that's really hard to answer.
What's roughly the time frame and budget for some of the projects?
Yeah. Every time I go out, people ask this question. It really depends. I mean, I think we work like many other type foundries or design agencies. Something we do pro bono, and some projects are of a more corporate. So many people go into the project, and it's very time consuming. But I would say, to a ballpark estimate, is it can take everything from 2 or 3 weeks. The Rescape typeface took, I guess, 1 week to make. So that's very fast, but that's also working very hard, so you need time off afterwards. Whereas we have been working with Nissan and Mitsubishi and Infiniti designing their brand typefaces. That takes a lot of time. It can take up to 2 months. But I think even more, a really great thing about it is that if we, let's say, design 2 or 3 weights, bespoke typeface, and a light, a regular, and a bold, and the client start using it and liking it, they might come back to buy italics and black and, etc. For the Danish railway typeface that was designed like 20 or 25 years ago, we just recently added a new weight to that family. So I think it can take everything from 2 weeks until, forever. But it's very different. Yeah.
So first and foremost, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I really enjoyed the way you went in depth into explaining the process and the work. Second thing, I know, in a way that when you're designing a typeface, you could have multiple iterations of that typeface itself. But when you're sort of like coming down to your process and finishing up on the work itself, how do you know, or when do you know that this might be the iteration that I might want to go with, or how many processes do you go through before you get to that point that you know that this might be the one that I want to emphasize on?
I think the first step is to have a typeface concept. For example, with the Gore-Tex, the concept is that the horizontal stems, they vibrate and react to sound. Then we have nailed the concept, and that's great because that's the hard part, I think. Then comes the whole production, the finalizing. So when we have a concept that looks professional, then it's done, I would say, because it makes no sense to have a typeface that dissolves over time, like the Rescape typeface, or a typeface that kind of mimics the A6 Tiger logo, for example, if it looks crap when it's done. So there are two, how can you say, steps there, the conceptual part and the production and the finalizing, because I think in type design, and that's something that is so fascinating about type, I think it's so much about craftsmanship and making something that looks beautiful, actually. So yeah, I think those two things, when we can check them off, at least in our own opinion, because if I go back to an old typeface we did, often I don't like it because I can see all the flaws. And that's another thing that is so great about type, is that the more you work with it, the more you realize you know nothing. That's at least the experience I have. There's so much more to know all the time. So when I look at old projects, I don't fancy them that much.
Yeah. What is your favorite part about the process, and what do you find most challenging about the process?
My favorite part of the process is collaborating with Rasmus and Clara and Bo and whoever we are working with at Kontrapunkt. Actually, the Rescape typeface, the concept was an idea that the executive director Philip brought back from Japan, that he made very quickly, like a very rough sketch. It was just, an existing typeface we did, just adding an outline in Illustrator in a white color, so slowly the typeface dissolves. And then we kind of made it beautiful, you can say. But I think my favorite part is definitely the conceptual part, because that's our small niche in the type world, is that we claim to make bespoke typefaces. So and we strive for, how can you say, originality in the letter shape. So when we are satisfied with that, I think that's the part I enjoy the most.
Yeah. And the most challenging part?
That part too. And I also think it's challenging to finalize a typeface. I mean, you should really not neglect how difficult it is. at least from my experience, it takes many hours, and yeah. So the conceptual part is tough, but also finishing, because you have to quality check the typeface, because when we deliver something to Maersk, they push a button and it's distributed to like 80,000 people. So if there's a flaw in it, it falls back on me and my colleagues, and I can't get sleep. So that's really important too. Yeah.
What kind of technical QA tools do you use?
What kind of, sorry?
So there's 80,000 people who need it. What kind of QA do you do?
Okay, yeah, that's technical, but that's okay. Well, first of all, there's a really smart way, I think, is you can, in Firefox, the browser, you can install your typeface in the root library of your Macintosh, and you can use it as a web font on every website you visit. So while working on a typeface, I just use Firefox. So I have to look at my own work and the work we do together all the time. So that's a really good way to test it. But then, of course, we also, that's technical, we have to make sure that it looks good on Microsoft Office apps, for example, the TrueType fonts. And we have to make sure that all the outlines are perfect, and that the optical alignment is, put the right places. So it's actually examining every individual letter shape. And then, of course, we also have to look very much, pay attention to the kerning and the matrices as well. But I think it really depends on what kind of typeface you make, because I was not taught at KABK or Reading. So I have been used to make typefaces built upon components, very geometrical typefaces. So yeah, it's very based upon components, of course, and yeah, that's how we quality check it. But I mean, I always see flaws afterwards. It's impossible to kind of make sure that there are no errors, I think. But I think the whole QA thing has become easier, because back in the day, a typeface was printed and it was harder to update it. We try to implement a way with the clients where if we have finalized the typeface, we can just update it if they need another version, or if we see a flaw, we just update it. Of course, when a client like Maersk, they obviously pay a lot of money to make sure that doesn't happen, so that takes a lot of hours. And I would say that in the slide I showed Clara, it's a colleague of mine, French woman. She's an amazing type designer. She's really good at that as well. She's really good. Unfortunately, she's on maternity leave now, so we actually need a new colleague for a year.
The clients you guys get for the type studio, are those people who specifically are coming to Kontrapunkt for custom type design, or is it more like, in general, the larger design studio sells people on, like, this is a service that we offer? You know, it's a lot of labor, obviously, it can be very expensive to do that kind of work, so how do you convince people that they need something? Why not just use an existing, plenty of great fonts out there? So, or do people just come because we really want this, we want one of your custom pieces?
It's a mix. Some clients, they come because they want a bespoke typeface. That's not unusual on very big corporate level, because, and that's a procurement thing, I guess. Licensing fonts is really expensive for a big company. So over time, it might actually be cheaper to develop your own typeface. So it can be an investment, and then they come to us to buy a bespoke typeface. But in many projects, we also just integrate it as a part of the identity. And it's something we constantly discuss, because if we just make an identity proposal for a brand or a collaborator that includes a bespoke typeface, I mean, that's not fair, because then they have to pay a lot of money for something that we just made up. But actually, I would claim that often when we show the typeface, and often because the typefaces we do are rooted in the company's values, or like the maps I showed, a historical reference, it's something that is unique to them, and then they actually want to buy it. So we don't have to force it on them. Mostly they agree, but I have tried plenty of times that they say, yeah, that looks great, but let's just go with something that already exists, which is fine, because not all projects should have a bespoke typeface. I mean, if it makes sense for the client. But it's a mix, I would say. And I think the demand for bespoke typeface on, how can you say, multinational corporate level, it has grown. And we also receive more inquiries more and more. That's more and more often, I would say. But it's a mix, yeah. Yeah?
How do you gather the team for producing a font? What kind of positions or how many people who work together for creating one of the big companies?
For the Maersk, for example, or the one we did for Mitsubishi or something like that, it's on the type, from the type lab, it's Rasmus and Bo and I and Clara, 4 people, and yeah, that's it. I mean, we work together with the graphic designers in Kontrapunkt as well. They test the betas we make. It's very easy to just generate a beta font, and they can type a headline, and we can see if it works in the context. And I mean, as we make a lot of projects in Asia now, we also have collaborators, really great type designers that know Japanese or Hangul, South Korean. So we have plenty of collaborators, and when we design, for example, Cyrillic, it's the script they use in Russia, for example. I mean, it's in many ways that's similar to Latin to some extent, but of course we have collaborators, native Russians that can go through it and make design iterations based on our Latin type concept. But I mean, on the design side, we are 4 people, or 2. It depends on the project of the size of the project, but yeah, like that.
So how do you collaborate? So you
How is what? Sorry.
collaborate. So how do you can you work at the same time on this project? Okay, so I'm in this class as well.
Mm.
It's the first time I develop my own typeface.
Okay.
So I just have a hard time imagining how you can work together on the front, because right now I'm just
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Actually, Rasmus and I, the guy I showed in the beginning, in the woods, we always sit at the same computer. So we actually do it together in the conceptual phase. And I guess that's a bit unusual as well, but we have like a shared visual language in our heads. So I mean, yeah, that's how we do it. Or it could, while I've been over here, I can send a sketch to him or Bo or Clara, and they can comment on it, and then we send it back and forth. So that's how we do it. But of course, when you go into production, you know, generating all the Latin character set, I mean, that's just one person who does that. And for example, with the Kaimoku, then I finalize it, and then Rasmus and Clara, they quality check it and send it back to me. So there's a lot of back and forth. It's very important that you don't take criticism personal, because I mean, for example, Rasmus and I, we know each other very well, so we can be very direct, which it doesn't always work with our colleagues. So it depends. I mean, yeah, we send back and forth or sit with the same computer, actually. Yeah.
What do you wish you knew at the beginning of your career in typeface design?
What I was wishing?
What do you wish you knew at the beginning of your career in typeface design?
That you can make a living from type. So I didn't have to be so scared.
What software do you use to draw?
We use Glyphs app, which, and I mean, there are there are a couple of very good software. There's RoboFont as well, and there's FontLab. The thing I really appreciate about Glyphs app is how they cluster the different scripts and languages, so it's easier, at least for me, to see how you know how to develop the different scripts. And also a very great thing about Glyphs is that it has a really great community on the web, so you can ask questions and they answer seriously within 10 minutes. They are so quick. So I think Glyphs is it's both a student tool, but it's also a very professional tool. So we use Glyphs. But we also use, Illustrator, pen and paper. Not me that much, but some of the others. Thank you very much.